Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are joining us. My name is Christian Grđan, and as a Vice President of Mental Health Europe, it is a great pleasure for me to be opening this side event on the occasion of 14th session of the Conference of State Parties to the UNCRPD. For those who don't know, Mental Health Europe is a member to the European Disability Forum and an European non-governmental network committed to the promotion of positive mental health and the protection of the human rights of ex-users of mental health services, persons with psychosocial disabilities, their families, and carers. This event is co-organized together with Validity Foundation, and I am very happy to be handing over to colleagues from Validity later in this session. Today, we will be addressing, and I must say addressing once again, an issue that has been of great concern to a large number of stakeholders committed to making the whole UNCRPD an obligation and reality. As many of you know, since 2014, the Council of Europe has been working on a legal document, the draft additional protocol to the so-called Oviedo Convention on Bioethics and Human Rights. This protocol focuses on involuntary treatment and placement of persons experiencing mental health problems. This protocol is very problematic in many ways, because under the argument of creating legal safeguards to regulate involuntary treatment and placement, it actually legitimizes mental health laws, policies, and practices that allow for coercive measures. To make it a little bit more precise, this protocol is being developed by a body called the Bioethics Committee, once established to oversee and monitor the implementation of the Council of Europe Oviedo Convention. But I regret that the spirit of the UNCRPD has not been taken on board by the committee. And to reiterate the words of the Special Rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities from previous discussion this year, with this work, it seems that the Council of Europe is deepening an archaic view of regulating human rights enshrined in the European Convention on Human Rights, whereas the UNCRPD as a convention wants to breathe a new life into human rights. Approaches to mental health that rely on coercive measures, forced treatment, institutionalization, and the denial of legal capacity must become a history. The disability movement, persons with lived experiences, users and survivors of psychiatry, UN experts, and UNCRPD committee respectively, have repeatedly spoken out against the work on the draft additional protocol, but yet all calls for withdrawal have been ignored time and time again. That's why we decided to start a campaign reaching out to stakeholders across the 47 member states of the Council of Europe. Together with the European Disability Forum, we have developed an advocacy toolkit to encourage national stakeholders to join our efforts, because we need a united push. You can find further information on the campaign page that my colleagues will share in the chat box. And today, I'm happy to inform you about the first success of the campaign, and that is that in the first biannual meeting in early June, DHBio decided to postpone the vote to its November session. It is a small victory, but we needed to keep going. So once again, let's make it loud and let's make it clear. Coercion is not care. And in fact, mental health care without coercion is possible, which is echoed not only by the civil society, but also bodies such as the World Health Organization and its Quality Rights Initiative. Some of you might have followed the WHO launch of its guidance with technical packages on community mental health services, called Promoting Person-Centered and Rights-Based Approaches, which is still available on its YouTube channel. Here we are today together at such a global conference such as COSP to think about global perspectives on this work by the Council of Europe. While the European Convention on Human Rights has been a long-time inspiration for other regions in the world, it seems that this is less the case with mental health and human rights. In fact, the additional protocol, if adopted, could further make a friction in the international law, breaching key UNCRPD obligations. We thus want to ask today, how could this protocol affect other parts of the world? How have other regions approached the questions of the UNCRPD, in particular about ending coercion, the institutionalization, and legal capacity so far? And what could the Council of Europe learn from them? How have different stakeholders around Europe and beyond been engaged to try to convince the DHBio committee to withdraw the draft additional protocol? For this, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers joining us today, which will be sharing their perspectives and views before we move into the moderated discussion. Unfortunately, I must inform you that Madame Catalina de Vandas, who is the ambassador to the representation Costa Rica at the United Nations in Geneva, is not able to join us today, but she sends her regards. Nevertheless, I'm very pleased to once again have a wide range of experts joining us. And with that, I mean most fundamentally experts by experience. To the audience, and in particular delegates of the very DHBio committee that might be with us today, let me warmly invite you to be inspired by the UNCRPD vision and its spirits of participation. It is never too late to respect human rights. And still, there is a time to stop to work on the draft protocol. Please do it. So before we start some few technical details, this event is being recorded and is live streamed on Mental Health Europe's YouTube channel. If you want to tweet about this event, please make use of the hashtag #WithdrawOviedo. If you like to share your thoughts, please use the chat box. However, should you want to ask a question to the speakers, please use the dedicated Q&A box so we can better see them. We also have live captioning. For this, click on the button on the bottom of your screen. I would like to warmly thank you in advance for your commitment and support today. So first, stakeholder and respected speakers that we are having today are from European Network of Users and Survivors in Psychiatry. We have today with us excellent Jolene Santegoods and Stephanie Woolley. I would like now to give floor to you. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. I'm Jolien Santegoods. I'm a board member of the European Network of Users, Ex-Users and Survivors of Psychiatry, which is the only grassroots or umbrella organization in Europe of persons with psychosocial disabilities. INUSP is concerned about the European bottleneck for the rights of persons with psychosocial disabilities. There is a clash between the human rights enshrined in the CRPD in Article 14 and the series of coercive legislation in Europe. And in Europe, 3 legal critical frameworks are currently relevant. The first is the European Convention on Human Rights, dating from 1950, and which is binding all European Council of Europe states. Under Article 5.1.e, the European Convention on Human Rights still allows for the lawful detention of persons with so-called unsound mind, alcoholics, drug addicts, or vagrants. And this provision runs counter to the UNCRPD. INUSP therefore has been calling to amend Article 5.1.e of the European Convention on Human Rights with the provisions of the CRPD Article 14, since there should be no deviation or conflict with the universal discourse of human rights and the European discourse of human rights. The second relevant framework is the Council of Europe Oviedo Convention, which dates from 1979 and is ratified by 29 out of 47 Council of Europe member states. Articles 6 and 7 are similarly based on the deprivation of rights and are not based on the provision of support and are also failing to comply with the UNCRPD. And these 2 European human rights conventions have set the tone for the European interpretation of human rights across the mental health care field in the past decades. And they have been used to legitimize the widespread detention and coercion by presenting these harmful methods as supposed solutions. Now, currently, the draft additional protocol to the Oviedo Convention presents another framework with a similar repressive approach to mental health crisis situation, which again is in violation of the UNCRPD. And this draft is, like Christian said, prepared by the Bioethics Committee of the Council of Europe, and they will expect it to be voting at the end of this year. The draft additional protocol clearly presents lower and other standards than the UNCRPD, including practices that amount to torture and ill treatment. And as history with the European Convention has already shown us, the provisions entailed by the draft additional protocol would only be leading to a further rise of forced hospitalization and treatment, of community treatment orders, guardianship, and institutionalization. The European assumption that forced treatments would protect the dignity and human rights do not correspond at all with the lived experience of people who have been subjected to these practices. In many places in our so-called developed countries, there are still horrible and unacceptable situations in institutions, causing fear and trauma. Coercion does not result in safety or well-being, but results in suffering without support. And therefore, the risk of problems and escalations only increase. Forced interventions do not truly protect the rights of people concerned, but amount to torture and ill treatment. The draft additional protocol to the Oviedo Convention has no added value at all. The global guidelines from the 90s already stated similar provisions, which have been revoked and superseded by the provisions of the UNCRPD. The European standards and the draft additional protocol pose significant barriers for anyone submitting complaints about deprivation of their liberty or by harm by coercion under mental health care laws, because these outdated European standards consider detention based on a psychosocial disability or based on mental health problems as supposedly lawful. And subsequently, the courts would not find that the law was violated or that a breach of their own interpretation of human rights has been committed. In nearly all states in Europe, the national legislation is already containing comparable and similar provisions to the draft, which pose coercion as a last resort measure and claiming to avert imminent danger to self or others in the absence of alternatives. Also in Georgia and the Ukraine and other Eastern European countries, provisions already exist, yet they expose people to detention in inhumane facilities with horrible conditions. And in countries where the systems are supposedly more developed, an ongoing rise of the use of forced measures is witnessed. These type of coercive legislations do not reduce the recourse to forced measures, but they actually facilitate and stimulate human rights violations by creating acceptance of such practices and using human rights rhetorics while the actual practice comprises human rights violations. The European Union has ratified the CRPD, and in 2015, the EU review before the CRPD committee resulted in guidelines on Article 14 on liberty and security of persons, and these call on the EU to do everything within their possibilities to abolish coercion from mental health care practices across Europe. And now would be the time to act. If I may remind you, Europe has a dark history of war and oppression, which actually led to the foundation of human rights under the United Nations, as well as the Council of Europe. And the history teaches us that psychiatry in the past has contributed to dangerous ideas by suggesting the separation of entire groups from society as inherently dangerous. And we Europeans, we said, never again should this happen in Europe. And now is the time to prove that. Calling certain groups inherently dangerous is a path we should never be taking. UN experts have repeatedly and explicitly called on the Council of Europe to stop doing this. The CRPD calls for a shift away from the incapacity approach, and Europe's history teaches exactly that. So the draft additional protocol to the Oviedo Convention needs to be struck down. And I would now like to give the floor to Stephanie Woolley. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jolijn. As usual, your words move us all very much. I hope most of you or all of you agree with us here today. So I'm also very honored to be here. My name is Stephanie Woolley. I'm a deputy board member of the European Network of Users, Ex-Users, and Survivors of Psychiatry, UNUSP. I wanted to spend a few minutes again to explain, as Christian said in his introduction, how coercion in mental health care is not care and cannot be, and why we are against the draft additional protocol. Coercion is routinely used as a method of control and often caused by a lack of adequate resources. Psychiatry can involve very dramatic methods of control. This is something we discuss among members of the European network. To give just one example, in Georgia, our INUS chair, Olga Kalina, has informed us that PHR, the Partnership for Human Rights she works with, has reported that women with psychosocial disabilities suffering domestic violence prefer to continue to live with their rapists and abusers than to be sent to a psychiatric institution, threatened as the only alternative. They fear what they know will be a similar type of coercion. This means that perpetrators can use this as a means of control. When forced interventions are used, it will naturally lead to violence. Protesting is a logical reaction. How would you feel? But this is seen as an acute symptom of an illness. There is absolutely no balance of power in what becomes a paternalistic relationship with psychiatry that never leads to real care. And I know people who have been in this situation for decades. People do anything to get out of the situation, including accepting to be coerced in the community under treatment orders. This also leads to fear of reaching out for physical health care, making the situation for the person worse. Coercion is not care. No one can open up and explain how they feel and their problems when they have been treated like this. Au contraire, it is motivation to hide your problems out of fear of being coerced and controlled again. Another point we wanted to bring up is how forced interventions violate not only the rights of people actually coerced, but a much wider group of people who become afraid and are impacted by these measures. Patients, as well as staff, are traumatized by witnessing the coercion of others in seclusion, restraint, or just on the ward, threatened by solitary confinement, or the mitard, as the French psychiatric nurses say. In France, people complain that when in seclusion and physically restrained on a bed in a psychiatric hospital or forensic ward, that other patients can see them, either through door windows or through windows in outside courtyards looking in. In psychiatric hospitals in Georgia, 5 people can be in the same room when one person is restrained. The other people can be punished for trying to release them. You can imagine all kinds of dynamics go on. Patients help staff with restraining other patients in exchange for coffee or cigarettes, creating a division among patients with a prison subculture of control. This engenders people who want to manipulate and coerce others. This can also even be applied to today's peer workers who may be asked to do training or participate in restraint measures. Cases have been reported to us from the Netherlands of interpersonal conflict, theft, or abuse among patients. And when reported, it is always the patient's fault, who is told to accept the violation of their rights, because that's the reality of being in a psychiatric ward. No one will believe you when faced with staff and psychiatrists. With a psychiatric diagnosis, you must accept everything, including the invasion of privacy in your own home with community treatment orders, when a home should be everyone's refuge of safety. And these are examples from places where the legislation could be considered superior to the provisions contained in the draft protocol. Now, we do see some positive signs from states. Organizations of persons with lived experience must be fostered and coercion abolished, so that there is no need to even consider institutionalization, because community services and housing exist. Under the pressure of the UNCRPD, states are considering or acting on deinstitutionalization, the reduction, the abolishment of seclusion and restraint. Mental health service users are called on to be involved in monitoring at higher levels. Although in many countries, governments still prefer token shareholders or stakeholders with a top-down approach. A promising sign, yes, is the WHO guidance designed for and in consultation with us on community mental health services, promoting person-centered and rights-based approaches, and the WHO's quality rights program rolling out worldwide that states really need to use. It's perfect timing. We cannot accept the hypocritical use of registers recording the human rights violations that occur in terms of the number of hours or days of restraint and seclusion. And we must avoid at all costs the risk that chemical restraint replaces physical restraint. And so, like many other stakeholders by our side, we thank you for doing everything in your power to convince states that the draft protocol is not the way forward, and that the CRPD rights-based initiatives we see moving ahead must not be jeopardized by conflicting human rights standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie and Yolene, both of you, for sharing the reality of coercion and force in psychiatric treatment, and for reminding us all to history. It was not that much long ago that horrible things happened to people because of their disability, and this history shall never repeat again. It is so good that we have UNCRPD to make rights live and to be open for everybody, and it is now the possibility to do something more for people than we did in the history. And this is the reason why we are so much opposed to the Oviedo Protocol now. I would like now to pass the floor to Brian Emmanuel Maina to share his perspectives. Brian Emmanuel is a 27-year-old Kenyan mental health and disability rights advocate with a psychosocial disability, a participant in the Inclusion Works project and the Time to Change Global Mental Health Champion on mental health anti-stigma. He is a lead technical support at users and survivors in psychiatry in Kenya, a youth mentor, visual and performing artist. Brian Emmanuel, you have the floor.
So thank you so much, Christian. And and it's a pleasure to be here. For those who are just joining us, I am Brian Emmanuel Maina. And as Christian just mentioned, I'm a disability rights advocate with users and survivors of psychiatry in Kenya, USPK, and I'm also a user of psychiatry. I'll start by saying that this legally binding document that's supposedly intended to safeguard all human beings' integrity, dignity, and identity, while also assuring that everyone's rights and basic freedoms are respected within the application of biology and medicine without discrimination, has begun a variety of key things that don't seem to be in line with this and the CRPD in its proposed draft additional protocols. I will firmly state that forced interventions in mental health care, such as solitary confinement, restraints, forced medication, and forced institutionalization infringes on fundamental human rights to liberty and security for persons with psychosocial disabilities. We should not allow the mainstreaming of a coercive culture because coercion is the opposite of care. The additional protocols encouragement of the institutionalization of persons with psychosocial disabilities contradicts Article 3, Article 12, Article 14, Article 19, and Article 25 of the CRPD. And these will create a serious tension between governments' commitments under the Regional Convention and international human rights standards in respect to persons with psychosocial disabilities with its acceptance. Compliance with the CRPD is the basic minimum requirement. The right to independent living and being included within the community carries with it legal obligations for all forms of institutionalization by stating that living with the community with choices equal to others is an equal right to all or any person with disabilities. The CRPD therefore reaffirms that living within the community is an inalienable right that doesn't require disclosure of ability, eligibility, or entitlement. However, in some cases, support may be necessary. And also, the concern now could be the way to consider making living independently and being included within the community as stipulated in Article 19 of the CRPD as simple as possible. Compulsory medical treatment and incarceration or institutionalization based on disability amount to a limitation of legal capacity. And these practices are condemned under Article 14, liberty. Additionally, as Articles 17 and 25, respect for physical and mental integrity and free and informed consent in healthcare. The requirements of the additional Oviedo Protocol, without a doubt, go counter to the CRPD's expected paradigm shift. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities explicitly indicates that individuals with disabilities cannot be subjected to legal norms or processes for denial of legal ability, coercive treatment, or forced institutionalization or hospitalization, which such practices must be eliminated and substituted with supporting measures that respect people with disabilities, autonomy, and integrity. Additionally, the CRPD committee has stated repeatedly that the involuntary detention of persons with disabilities based on risk and dangerousness, alleged need of care or treatment, or other reason tied to impairment or health diagnosis is contrary to the right of liberty and amounts to arbitrary deprivation of liberty. Therefore, a radical analysis of the additional Oviedo Protocol is required to assess current legal capacity concepts that has got to be adjusted in accordance with Article 12 and other relevant articles of the CRPD. Because legal capacity and defending the rights of persons with disabilities are linked, one amongst the four most important requirements for ensuring that additional Oviedo Protocol complies with the CRPD is ensuring the development of a legal capacity framework based on the CRPD principles. Such a framework will have to include building blocks for decision-making, consent, intervention, or non-intervention in one's decisions that will be utilized and adjusted throughout the mental health field. In sum, there's no way for the additional Oviedo Protocol to realize CRPD compliance without first updating the perception of capability and incapacity, as well as adding and incorporating assisted decision-making into the model. Without such, these protocols have nothing to do with protection of rights. The proposed additional Oviedo protocols must reflect the latter and spirit of African Disability Protocol that complies with the provisions in the Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities and also contextualizes human rights from an African perspective. And I believe that it is important in the spirit of international cooperation for the two continents to learn from one another in ensuring that we comply with the CRPD and respect international human rights standards and norms. The CRPD is clear in the call for abolition of involuntary treatments and for deinstitutionalization, and I believe that Europe should be able to achieve this. Thank you so much for your attention.
I'm sorry for the delay when I'm commented because I'm having some technical issues, but I hope everything is fine now. Thank you very much, Brian. I'm glad that you mentioned autonomy and the integrity of person, and there is still a lot to do in understanding these concepts when it comes to persons with psychosocial disabilities. It is our European unfortunate that we have to do it through the Oviedo Protocol and that we do not have anything else to resort to, but I hope that this will also change and that we will get better opportunities that we have now. The recent WHO guidance that we have already mentioned show that it is indeed possible to respect autonomy and integrity without coercion and force. Thank you for showing us African perspective. Now I'm going to move to, I'm sorry, I got a little bit lost. Jonas, can you help me? No, it is Jana. I'm sorry. I got a bit confused with all of this. So now I'm glad to pass floor to Jana Offergeld from the German Institute for Human Rights. She is a researcher and policy advisor at the German Institute for Human Rights, which is the national CRPD monitoring body. A few days ago, the Institute published a statement in which it advised the federal government of Germany not to endorse this protocol. Dear Jana, thank you so much for joining us today. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I actually also have a presentation, which I might turn on, maybe makes it easier to listen to me. If you find it harder, please let me know and then I'll switch it off. First, I have to switch it on though. Can everybody see my presentation? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, yes. Right.
Well, thanks. First of all, I'd like to thank Mental Health Europe and the Validity Foundation for inviting us and inviting me to present our perspective on the additional protocol. My name is Jana Offergeld. I am a researcher and policy advisor at the CRPD monitoring body at the German Institute for Human Rights. So I was asked to just briefly elaborate on our general work regarding the rights of persons with disabilities, and then before I will highlight the perspectives or our perspective on the draft protocol and its possible impact on the situation of elderly people, of people with psychosocial disabilities, with learning difficulties, and people with lived experience in the mental health context. The German Institute for Human Rights is an A status national human rights institution. And this means that we are a politically independent body with a very broad mandate to protect and to promote human rights. And the Institute, to do so, conducts human rights-based research and monitors the human rights situation in Germany. We advise political stakeholders on federal and on state level, justice, civil society organizations, and the private sector on the implementation of international human rights treaties. We regularly report to the German Parliament and we conduct statements for national and international courts. And as a human rights institution, we are also frequent or infrequent dialogue with the United Nations, as well as the European Union and the Council of Europe. So the CRPD itself is the first human rights treaty that explicitly sets out an independent monitoring framework. Article 33 calls for states to establish one or more mechanisms, independent mechanisms, to promote, to protect, and to monitor the rights and its implementation. And in Germany, this role is taken on by the German Institute for Human Rights. In line with the overarching motto of the disability rights movement, nothing about us without us, the CRPD also explicitly demands persons with disabilities and their representative organizations to be actively involved in the monitoring. And we take this task seriously. So in this slide, our monitoring body is also in frequent dialogue with respective disabled people's organizations and more broadly with civil society organizations. Among other things, of course, also on the issues of involuntary treatment and involuntary admission in the mental health context. In all our activities, we are obliged to work independently, and we use the CRPD and other human rights instruments and sources as our only guiding framework. I think as you've been told that we have recently published a press release on the draft additional protocol to the Oviedo Convention, calling our government to stand against the lowering of human rights protection of people with disabilities and to vote no regarding its adoptions in the bioethic committees. And it might be interesting that Germany has itself not signed or ratified the Oviedo Convention. And this is actually due to the horrific crimes committed in the name of research and medical progress during the Nazi regime, which have already been mentioned a couple of times. But Germany is nevertheless represented in the Committee on Bioethics of the Council of Europe, and it also has the right to vote. We have already heard a lot of reasons for the protest and the concerns about the protocol today. And from our perspective, the additional protocol applies a medical model of disability, and it therefore contradicts the provisions of the CRPD, as it still allows for involuntary admission and treatment on the grounds of disability or on the grounds of a psychiatric diagnosis. If adopted, we fear that the protocol threatens to lower existing human rights standards in medical and care in many European countries, if not in all. Its adoption carries the risk to increase involuntary confinement of persons with disabilities and elderly persons, especially those with dementia. And in contradiction to the CRPD, the protocol also legitimizes the use of coercion. So as the CRPD monitoring body, we therefore are relieved that the decision about the adoption of the protocol was delayed until November 2021, and we will continue to advise our government and to work for the opposition of its adoption. At the same time, the German Institute for Human Rights is also part of the European Network of National Human Rights Institutions, ENRI. And ENRI also released a statement on June 7th. And as addressed there, the network is particularly concerned that the protocol will create a conflict between international standards on the global and on the European level. And we share this concern. The adoption of the protocol on European level would contradict the recommendations that the CRPD committee has already made in many member states on the part of their state review process, and it could hinder the development of a more progressive legislative framework in many member states. And we believe that even while Germany has not signed the Oviedo Convention, the additional protocol could still potentially influence the legal system, the legal mental health system in Germany. But also its consequences could reach beyond Europe. As our press release emphasized, that it could send a devastating sign internationally also to countries outside of Europe. So, as highlighted in the ENRI statement, the additional protocol in its current draft should be replaced by a new framework, which needs to be developed in line with the CRPD and in collaboration not only with UN and NHRI representatives, but most importantly, with active or inactive participation with the people concerned and their representative organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jana. It is so important that the Institute published a statement against the Oviedo Protocol a few days ago to show that Germany as a whole is not in favor of the protocol. While not being a party to the Oviedo Convention, German delegation in the DHBio supported the work on the Oviedo Protocol, and it is indeed very important to see that there are forces in Germany who do see the future without force and coercion. Thank you once again. Before moving to a moderated Q&A discussion, I would now like to give the floor to Anne Campbell, who is the co-executive director of Validity Foundation. She will share Validity's perspectives on the draft additional protocol and past activities working to its withdrawal. Anne, you have the floor now, and you are the moderator from now on. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm honored to be able to address you after the hugely important interventions by the experts who've already spoken here today. Before I start the Q&A segment, I would like to briefly share some very specific information relating to a request that was submitted by DHBio, the Bioethics Committee, to the European Court of Human Rights on topics that closely relate to those engaged by the draft protocol. In December 2019, while the protocol was being drafted and an intense debate was raging between DHBio and civil society, DHBio decided to submit a request to the European Court of Human Rights for an advisory opinion. The request asked the court to provide its opinion on two questions concerning Articles 7 and Articles 26 of the Oviedo Convention. Article 7 allows a person with a mental disorder, and I apologize for that language, I'm quoting directly from the convention itself. It allows for a person with a mental disorder to be forcibly treated for that disorder if not treating the person would be likely to result in serious harm to their health. It states that the treatment can only be given subject to protective conditions prescribed by law. DHBio has asked the court to give its opinion on which protective conditions a state needs to regulate to meet the minimum requirements of this provision. Article 26 allows states to restrict rights in the convention as long as the restrictions are prescribed by law and necessary in a democratic society for, among other things, the protection of the rights of others. DHBio has asked the court if a state needs to apply the same protective conditions as in Article 7 in the event that someone is subjected to forced treatment not to protect their health, but to protect someone else from serious harm. Essentially, DHBio is asking the court what psychiatric or other approvals, evaluations, assessments, monitoring, opportunities to appeal, or other measures need to be put in place to legitimize forced psychiatric interventions against people with psychosocial disabilities without their consent. As you can imagine, this is extremely problematic because it is certain that the court will not provide an opinion in line with the CRPD. The court still relies on a series of old cases dating back to 1992 to justify forced treatment. In its view, as long as the medical professionals concerned think that the treatment is a medical necessity, forced treatment is justified. It has even gone so far as to say that a measure which is a therapeutic necessity cannot be regarded as inhuman or degrading. And in determining whether the treatment is necessary, the court looks mostly at whether the doctors have convincingly shown that it is necessary. Essentially, it's only concerned that the treatment is administered under the right so-called protective conditions. Of course, the request by DHBio is also problematic because DHBio must be aware that an opinion by the court on these questions will provide support for the drafting of the protocol. The protocol is being developed to clarify the standards of protection for involuntary treatment. It's evident that DHBio expects the court opinion on protective conditions to list requirements similar to those in the draft protocol. DHBio is well aware that disability rights organizations, people with psychosocial disabilities, other bodies within the Council of Europe and within the UN are all of the view that the protocol is misguided and should be rejected completely. The CRPD Committee, the UN Special Rapporteur on Disability, the Rapporteur on Health, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and the Council of Europe Commissioner for Human Rights have all roundly condemned DHBio's continuing work on this. To have the European Court, by contrast, provide a supportive opinion would go a long way to convincing states that they can simply ignore these opinions and adopt the text. But there is a good chance, thanks to the work of civil society organizations, that the court will not issue any opinion on this request. Although DHBio submitted the request to the court without any publicity and without notifying civil society or any other human rights or Council of Europe body, we nevertheless discovered the existence of the request in a court press release in June last year. 5 disability rights organizations, including Validity, wrote to the court requesting permission to submit third-party interventions in the case. All of the organizations strongly argued the CRPD standards in their submissions to the court, but we also argued that the court does not have the procedural competence to even provide an opinion on these questions. The court cannot provide an opinion on questions that might come before it in the future in a case involving an individual. Since the court regularly decides on cases of forced treatment, and indeed Validity alone has several such cases pending before the court, it is not legally empowered to issue an opinion as requested by DH-Bio. After submitting our comments, the organizations asked the court to share submissions by state parties. 25 states had also submitted interventions, and many of them also pointed out that the court does not have competence to issue an opinion on this request. Even if the court makes the right decision and refuses to provide an opinion, the move by DH-Bio has highlighted again the significant divergence between the case law of the court and the evolving regional and international interpretation of the rights of persons with psychosocial disability. The court is very much out of step with current human rights norms on the question of forced treatment and detention on the basis of disability. On these topics, it remains locked in the medical paradigm where psychiatric opinion trumps dignity, rights, and autonomy. Its focus on procedural protections and safeguards to legitimize torture, inhuman and degrading treatment is anachronistic and deeply harmful to persons with disabilities in Europe. Much as an opinion from the court in this case would lend credibility to the protocol, the adoption of the protocol would provide the court with a new regional instrument that it can rely on to perpetuate its own problematic position. It's an excellent victory that the vote for adoption by the Bioethics Committee was postponed earlier this month. Now let's build on this to ensure that it is never tabled again. And with that, I would like to open the floor to questions from the participants to any of the speakers who have already spoken today. If you have any, please do feel free to put them into the Q&A box. There is one that has already come in from earlier in the discussion, which perhaps I will actually briefly mention myself, which is a question in relation to Article 53 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which says that nothing in the convention shall be construed as derogating from any other international agreement to which the state is a party. Indeed, that is a valid point, and it is a point that Validity and some of the other organizations made before the European Court of Human Rights. There's also an argument that the CRPD is lex specialis, so should be the primary instrument for interpreting standards around forced treatment. And hopefully, if the court does come out with an opinion, it will take that argument in relation to Article 53 into account. But the court is reluctant to engage with questions such as that. It tends to try to avoid them by relying on the argument that the ECHR is a minimum floor, or that it's not competent to adjudicate on CRPD standards. But I think we have another question which came in, which I will put to INOSP, if that's all right. Stephanie or Joline or Olga might want to answer. The question is, in the future, how could persons with psychosocial disabilities and lived experiences of mental health difficulties be meaningfully involved at the Council of Europe level? What would you suggest? Hand it over to Stephanie, Joline, or Olga.
Could you repeat the question, Anne? I'm sorry.
Sure, of course. It is, let me pull it up. In the future, how could persons with psychosocial disabilities and lived experiences of mental health difficulties be meaningfully involved at the Council of Europe level?
Perhaps that would be an opportunity for our chair, Olga, to answer if she's here. Olga, are you here?
Well, we have clear problems with involvement. I mean, at the DH-Bio level, we have seen that the consultations are going on and the input from us is not being taken into account. So the process continues, and we are, well, like formally included, but in reality, we're not included. If the Council of Europe will operate under the current old paradigm, it will be problematic to get meaningful involvement at this level. So I would say that At this point, we can be involved as a party to just remind representatives of DHBI or other councils about the fact that the legislations they're working on is not compatible with the UNCRPD or with our rights, but I don't really have hope that we can be really meaningfully involved in the coming years, unfortunately. But yeah, we need to continue to try to do this and to try to get our voices heard and get visibility that we need to fight the draft protocol and similar legislation.
I also wanted to mention the very appreciated support from the European Disability Forum, which hasn't been mentioned up until now, but that has been a major supporter of our cause, along with other organizations such as Human Rights Watch, such as Autism Europe, such as IDA, of course, the International Disability Alliance, and so many other stakeholders that are against this draft protocol. 10 years ago, another idea of the Council of Europe, draft protocol, to strip persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities from voting rights. This was brought down by civil society, like those of us here. All we can hope for is that now the same will happen here with a realization of our human rights. And thank you so much, Validity, as well, and for everything you had to say.
Thanks, Olga and Stephanie. I think it's super important that that the work that INOSP is doing around this and the really incredibly active involvement that you guys have. But the one thing I would add is that because this is going to go to a vote again later this year, it's really, really important that people with psychosocial disabilities or mental health difficulties lobby at their national level to influence the states who are going to vote on this convention. And so I think at the beginning of the webinar, Jonas mentioned an advocacy toolkit that MHE has put together that you can find the link for further in the chat box. And I think using that to become more actively involved would be really, really good. I have another question here. I will give this to Brian, if that's all right. Brian Emanuel from USPK. So the question is, in your work in Kenya, how central is the focus on ending coercive measures in mental health? What is the situation of forced institutionalization?
Thank you so much. And so the situation with forced institutionalization in Kenya, it's something that was a huge challenge, just as it is in your case. And what has happened, we've been able to push for amendments in our laws that are able to combat that. Because one thing, there is a lot of awareness raising when it comes to the CRPD, to DPOs who champion for disability rights. And also we've also been able to partner with other persons in government and also open-minded people in the field of psychiatry. And this has been able to have a snowballing effect when it comes to the paradigm shift and the understanding of the CRPD, and also looking at mental health services from a human rights perspective. And right now, we also have a huge campaign when it comes to quality rights, which also champions against the coercion when it comes to mental health services.
Thanks, Brian. And I know that one of the issues that is coming up in Kenya, actually, that USPK has been involved in is the question of detention around the president's pleasures. So this is like unlimited detention in the criminal justice system when you're found unfit to stand trial. I wonder, Brian, what are your perspectives on that as a form of forced detention, which of course comes along with forced treatment for people with psychosocial disabilities?
So yeah, thank you. So yeah, there's also that, and as I mentioned, we are still in that we're still in the process of making amendments when it comes to laws that laws that are undermining to the respecting the human rights of persons with psychosocial disabilities, and also there's just a lot of work that is going around. It's progressive. It's still progressive, even with the new mental health document that was released earlier this month. There's some key points that were put out, but I feel there's still some more space for improvement when it comes to really understanding how much these laws are affecting as persons with psychosocial disabilities, to an extent where it infringes on our human rights.
Thanks, Brian, for that.
You're welcome.
I have another question that's come in, which I think makes an implicit assumption. So maybe I will ask Stephanie, Olga, or Joline to weigh in on this as well. We have a question that says, perhaps it's important to understand why one prefers and chooses forced treatment and supports it consciously and unconsciously. What are your thoughts? And I think that the question presupposes that there are people with disabilities who choose forced treatment, which I'm not sure that's well. Anyway, I would love to hear.
Well, yeah, I can take this one probably because I'm both person with lived experience and with the experience of restraints on chemical, physical, mechanical. And I'm also a monitor of institutions, psychiatric institutions, a member of NPM. So yes, I heard many stories and many perspectives from the patients. Mostly people choose the force, quite rarely choose, by the way. They choose force when they do not see any alternatives. When this is the only way how the situation is addressed in your country, nobody has idea, any clue of how it can be addressed differently. Yes, people just may lack imagination and may lack information about other services. They may have self-stigma. They may have beliefs about themselves like I cannot be controlled in any other ways. Very often patients in the institutions, they call themselves ill persons, like they use a specific terminology that is very stigmatizing towards themselves. When I tend to start explaining them the alternatives, the possibilities, all of them agree that it would be great if we have alternatives in place. But the thing is that the perspective of the state comes into the play, and the state has to think about resources, about priorities, because alternatives very often require human resources. And currently, for my country and for many other countries, we have lack of personnel in the system, which means lack of attention. And what do you do when you lack attention of a human person? Right, you use restraints, you use chemical restraints, you use mechanical restraints just to control people and to keep them calm and manageable when you have this acute lack of personnel and no prevention. So this is the answer basically, and lack of information and lack of resources causes all these beliefs, and we need to fight this as well by awareness raising. Thank you.
Thanks, Olga. That makes complete sense. I think it's often the easy way out for states as well. It's easier to use restraints than to invest in actually providing alternatives. Though I do have to say there's a huge amount of resources that states have available through the European structural and investment funds that are misused to perpetuate institutionalization and denial of legal capacity rather than to provide those alternatives, which is another good advocacy goal for us. A related question that's come in, I might ask Jana, actually. So this question is asking, how would you explain why so many policymakers still hold on to involuntary measures? Is it really just the used path? And why is the discussion so intransparent? In Germany, hardly anyone knows of that process in detail, even people being really involved in human rights. Do you have some thoughts on that, Jana?
I do have some thoughts. I was kind of afraid you might ask me. Well, I do have a lot of thoughts on that. I can tell you that I won't have like a clear, precise answer because I don't think there is one. I would like to think, first of all, I do think one reason is that it is a used path. I mean, we have in most countries all over the world have had a system, a mental health system and a disability support system, which was very much built on segregation and on the denial of legal capacity and on doubting people's legal capacity on the basis of their impairment. And this has been around for so many years that I do think it's a very persistent path of thought, which is hard to let go of. And on the other hand, I wouldn't want to think or believe that policymakers actually keep holding on to this only out of deficit-orientated views. I think it's also like a genuine thought of trying to protect. I mean, that's in Germany, the main argument against universal legal capacity and against or for involuntary admission and treatment is always that you need to protect the person. And while that's well meant, I think what's really lacking is, as my colleague said before, a lack of awareness about alternatives. I think we are so driven by the thought that there's those ultima ratio cases where you cannot have any alternative that we don't really look into them. So I think in regard to the German situation, I think first of all, it's a very complex system. There's different legal frameworks for each state when it comes to mental health, involuntary admission in the psychiatric context. And then there's a federal law on the custodianship system. And then there's law for forensic involuntary admission. So it's very complex. And I do think that it's more a case of having separate discourses where I think we should, probably both sides could really push forward to come back to a dialogue. I think there's at least in my perception, there's this discourse where the fact that there needs to be some kind of ultima ratio has already been so fixed, or people are so convinced that they are not looking for alternatives. And at the same time, there might be a parallel discourse, but they don't really get in touch with each other, or there's no vivid active dialogue between these beliefs. And I think that's a big problem as well. So I don't think that really answered the question, but that's some thoughts on this very complex situation.
Yeah, thanks, Jana. And it's coming across loud and clear again, the issue around lack of awareness and ignorance, that people still believe that coercion and forced treatment are actually effective or useful in any way, rather than a form of ill treatment. Okay, the next question that I have here, I will ask all of the panelists, anybody who feels like coming in on this question. How should the Council of Europe and DHBio regain the trust of persons with disabilities following the shambles around the protocol? It's a provocative question, but I think it's an important one. So if any of the panelists have thoughts on that, feel free to come in.
I do have thoughts on that. Well, as a person with lived experience as well, I've been almost 2 years solitary confined and strapped on a bed, and so many horrible, degrading things. And of course, it's hard to trust people who are involved in such businesses. But the moment that people change, it makes me so happy that I am willing to give them my trust. If they truly commit to the goal of abolishing coercion, I'll be there. And a lot of peers feel the same way. Thank you.
Thanks, Jolijn. That's quite powerful, and quite hard to reach that point sometimes, I think, for people. Anybody else like to come in on that question?
Well, if I may, I would say that stopping the work on the Oviedo Protocol, which can happen immediately now, because it is still not voted to be passed in the further proceeding at the Council of Europe, that would be the first step. But the second would be also promoting voluntary practices and voluntary treatment in psychiatry and making a sure statement that this is what is preferred, that coercion is not what is preferred, that violation of human rights is not what is preferred. It is what we know that it is possible to be done in practice, and we can see that from the excellent work of the WHO that we already mentioned. I think that the Council of Europe should look into that direction more than in the direction of coercion. Coercion should be a part of history.
Thanks, Christian. Yeah, I agree that the publication that WHO came out with last week could be contrasted with a similar publication that DH Bio came out with recently on alternatives to coercion as well, which shows the level of lack of knowledge within DH Bio on the human rights standards, I think. Christian, while I have you, maybe I can ask you another question that's come up here, which is to what date has the vote been postponed and what further actions are planned? And I think maybe in terms of the actions that are planned, maybe if you could mention something that MHE and the civil society advocacy are planning, as well as the DH Bio itself.
I would pass that comment to my colleague Jonas from I'm sorry, not WHO, the Mental Health Europe. Jonas, are you here? Can you respond to this question?
I am here, and I'm also
in
charge of the technical details in the back. So thank you very much, Christian and Anne, for the question. My name is Jonas. I work with Mental Health Europe. And as you've known, together with the European Disability Forum, we set up the campaign to withdraw the draft additional protocol. I sent the link a couple of times in the chat box where you can find more information. And so the vote, as we have said, has been successfully postponed to November. We think usually the meetings take place in early November. To be very frank, we're currently exploring a little bit what are the right action moments and what kind of possibilities do we have to be engaged again. You have seen that when you look at the advocacy toolkit that is on the campaign page, there are a couple of ideas for stakeholders to reach out on a national level with different organizations, writing letters to their respective ministries, and really reaching out to key stakeholders within the key ministries. I think we have to undergo a little bit of a reflection, as I said, in terms of what needs to be done, especially going towards that event in November, to be really vocal once again. There is a newsletter also that we are sort of coordinating together with the European Disability Forum. I encourage you to sign up to this. It's also available under the campaign page. And through that, we'll try to give you sort of some further suggestions and like key moments, whether it be like a sort of a virtual flash mob, for example, and reaching out and being really making or creating a lot of public awareness. And if you sign up to the newsletter, we will basically keep you up to date on that. There obviously is always the option also to engage with local and national journals. We have had a couple of articles and op-eds that were written in the different countries following this launch of the campaign, which is really great to see. And I hope this can be also like an ongoing activity in the different Council of Europe member states. So this is, I guess, all that I have to say for now, but please feel free to just follow the activities and we'll keep you up to date. Thank you.
Thanks a million, Jonas. I think that's a good note to end the Q&A session on. It gives me some hope that there are things that we can do together and ways that we can be effective together to make sure that this protocol is stopped in its tracks. So at this point, I will hand over to Mr. Jonas Ruškus, who is an independent expert member of the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, to give some concluding remarks to wrap up this webinar. And I want to, before that, say thank you to all of the panelists who've already spoken and everybody who's put in questions. It's been a very good discussion. So over to you, Jonas.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, all of you, for giving me the opportunity for closing remarks to this insightful and very meaningful webinar. And I would like to wish to provide you with the CRPD perspective and viewpoint of the committee, CRPD committee. The adoption of the CRPD Convention in 2006 was an immeasurable hope for all persons with disabilities, that all laws, regulations, and policies that regard persons with disabilities will be revised, and the discriminatory provisions will be abolished, and the human rights model of disability will be incorporated in all of them, with the aim to ensure dignity and freedom to all persons with disabilities on equal basis with all other people. However, after 15 years of adoption of the CRPD, the fundamental human rights such as freedom and equality are still being seriously infringed with regard to persons with disabilities, and especially that concerns persons with psychosocial disabilities. The CRPD committee is seriously concerned about the reluctance of the state parties to abolish legal provisions and practices, allowing the involuntary treatment of persons with psychosocial disabilities and the non-consensual commitment in mental health institutions on the account of the alleged dangerousness to themselves or others, or other reason tied to impairment. The CRPD committee observes with concern that persons with psychosocial disabilities globally continuing being denied rights and regular laws that are diverted to a separate track through mental health laws, allowing the lower standards when it comes to human rights protection, and consequently to arbitrary treatment and deprivation of liberty on the grounds of impairment. This situation would be perpetuated by the Council of Europe, the regional organization composed by the state parties of the convention and its committee of bioethics. The CRPD committee is seriously concerned that additional protocol to the Oviedo Convention reiterates and reinforces the infringement of fundamental human rights as freedom and equality through the draft additional protocol to the Oviedo Convention throughout regional European level. As a member of the CRPD committee, I must emphasize the involuntary treatment and non-consensual commitment on the ground of real or supposed psychosocial disability seriously corrupts the obligations of the state party under the Human Rights Treaty, seriously infringe the fundamental human rights of persons with psychosocial disabilities to dignity, freedom, and equality. I find fraudulent that the CRPD Convention is referred in the preamble of the draft additional protocol to the Oviedo Convention, although this draft explicitly contradicts the CRPD Convention. May I remind that way back in 2018, the CRPD committee issued a statement calling state parties to oppose the draft additional protocol to the Oviedo Convention. Within the statement, the CRPD committee declared that the draft additional protocol blatantly conflicts with the human rights of persons with disabilities recognized by the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It violates particularly Article 5 on equality and non-discrimination in conjunction with Articles 12 on the right on equal recognition before the law, Article 14 on the right to liberty and security, Article 17 on the right to physical and mental integrity, and Article 25 on the right to health. The committee clearly stressed that the state parties have an obligation not to deprive persons with disabilities of the right to make their own decisions equally to all people, nor to permit substitute decision makers to provide consent on their behalf. Personal autonomy, including the respect for one's own choices shaped by individual wills and preferences, must be respected, and the supported decision-making should be provided. The state parties have an obligation not to deprive persons with disabilities of liberty and security on the grounds of their actual and perceived mental impairments. The coercive psychiatry must be fully abolished and replaced with the support in decision-making on the health-related matters and with human rights-based models that respect freedom, will, and preferences of the person. The state parties have an obligation to abolish laws and regulations that discriminate persons with mental health conditions through the separate track of law and ensure the protection of persons with psychosocial disabilities under the law on an equal basis to others, including the law that upholds the duty not to harm. The state parties have an obligation to not to use force, chemical or physical restraints, isolation, seclusion, or sedation, since such practices may amount to torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. The respect for physical and mental integrity of a person with mental health condition must be ensured on an equal basis with others. For conclusion, on behalf of the CRPD committee, I call the Committee of Bioethics of Council of Europe, first, to listen and hear persons with psychosocial disabilities, to their civil organizations, and to take into account their views and recommendations for ensuring their human rights on an equal basis with all other people. Second, to comply with the obligations taken under CRPD conventions by the state parties of the Council of Europe. And finally, to discontinue the enactment of additional protocol to the Oviedo Convention and to take no further actions to legitimize the deprivation of liberty and equality of persons with psychosocial disabilities. Thank you very much. Over.
Thank you very much, Jonas, for these conclusion remarks. And I would like for the end just to share the floor with Stephanie Woolley again, so that she could share something with us that she wanted, and I see that in the chat. So Stephanie, the floor is yours now.
That's very kind of you, Christian, but after those wonderful concluding words from our UN representative, I just wanted to say that at INUS, when we were preparing for this event, we discussed how different we are, how each country of our members has different policies, some supposedly very evolved, some perhaps very evolved but without implementation. And Jolijn mentioned how Europeans are so interested in ending seclusion and restraint in homes in Nepal, and that everyone believes that we should not chain people and isolate them in terrible conditions in these developing countries, whereas we are frankly experiencing the same thing in these institutions and asylums still here in the old world of Europe. So in spite of these differences, why can't this be understood? And we hope that humanity will evolve and get involved in our common interest. Thank you so much for organizing this event. And I hope the COSP session will take it into account and it'll be a wonderful time.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you. Big thanks to all of you who participated today with us on this web event. Hopefully in the future, we are going to see each other in physical, so it will not be that technical as it was today. And hopefully it will be without Oviedo Protocol. We are still hoping that the DHBio and the Council of Europe will stop working on the Oviedo Protocol, and then we'll start doing something else, promoting voluntary treatment, voluntary practices, non-coercion, and change psychiatry and psychiatric treatment from its core. This is what we expect, we will never lose the hope that this will happen. Thank you.